I'm really excited today to talk to Corey Hutchins, who is a Colorado-based contributor for the Columbia Journalism Review, as well as a journalist for the Colorado Independent and a visiting lecturer on journalism at Colorado College. What I'm excited to talk to you about, excited and depressed a little bit, is specifically the Denver Post, which is the main newspaper, the only major newspaper in the city, in the capital of Denver, Colorado, and the turmoil that has been going on there since it was purchased by what's known as a Vulture Hedge fund in 2014, I believe. I've heard that the newspaper industry is dying, print media is dying, everything's going onto the internet. The advertiser-based model for print journalism is no longer sustainable. So it doesn't make any sense to me why newspapers would be the target of these sort of vulture hedge funds of the kind like Alden Global Capital. So why is this why are these attractive targets for them?
The broad strokes of it is we've heard the term vulture capitalism, and I think what we see is newspapers, as you said, are in decline, print newspapers. And so a savvy investment private equity firm looks around for distressed properties. Newspapers became distressed properties. They can take those, which generally produce a decent profit margin, and extract capital out of them by cutting. So they lay off reporters. They buy these newspapers that own buildings downtown, sell those buildings. And what I think the big fear is that there's really no long-term strategy for keeping these newspapers viable. The economic strategy is just to extract as much capital as you can out of them. And what that means in the journalism world is less reporters on the ground actually covering things, which, as we know, leads to less information in these communities. It's not just happening in Denver, it's happening all across the country. And it really only started to become, I think, front page news in just the past 6 weeks when the Denver Post itself started writing about this. Denver Post editorial page editor Chuck Plunkett published a 10-piece editorial package in the Denver Post without telling his top editor or the corporate folks what he was doing. And he wrote a house editorial that was headlined something like, "As vultures circle, the Denver Post must be saved." He reached out to contributors like the former longtime editor of the paper, Greg Moore, who resigned because he was sick of laying people off, and other folks like Ricardo Baca, who was the pioneering marijuana editor at the Denver Post, who resigned because I think he got sick of working for the hedge fund folks. And they wrote in saying things like, this is what's happening. Let's call out these people. Let's talk about this hedge fund. Let's name them in the paper and tell the folks what's going on with the local newspaper. Now, I don't think it was received very well by the corporate folks at Digital First Media, but it sure galvanized the public here in Denver. It was on the front page of the New York Times, saying that the Denver Post was an all-out revolt. And for the past 6 weeks, it's really roiled a very public conversation here in Denver and at other places across the country about hedge fund ownership of newspapers and what that means to the specific communities. In Denver, it sparked a lot of conversations about what can be done. And the Colorado Independent, the Denver Press Club, and the Colorado Media Alliance kind of got together last week and held some public forums at the Press Club. Over 150 people. We had to send some people away on Tuesday, and we had an encore presentation on Thursday, trying to kind of get the readership involved and kind of create a public discussion here about what can be done. I don't think we know yet. And so I would just say everybody should be kind of watching Denver to see what emerges from this as a possible solution in some of these other communities that kind of had the same problem.
If we are going to save newspapers or local journalism, if newspapers aren't covering local stories, then nobody is, because you can't get local stories. At least the international news and national news you can get from the AP wire or what have you, but that leaves nobody covering local stories and nobody watching the local politicians, nobody watching the local police force, nobody watching the local school board, and so on and so forth, covering those stories that are critical to the functioning of the local communities. And how is that going to happen in the future if we have owners who are just looking to extract all the money they possibly can out of these properties, and then they go bankrupt, and that's the end of the Denver Post, which we've seen with other newspapers? Is there any emerging consensus about what possibly can be done? I mean, I know Jeff Bezos can't buy every newspaper in America, and even that is a flawed solution. So what can be done?
No, I'll say this: there's no consensus about this, and that's what's really important, and that's why I think your viewers and anybody who's interested in this debate should be keeping an eye on Denver to see what comes out of this, because these are the things that we're talking about. There are folks here talking about whether it's a better idea to subscribe to the Denver Post or to cancel your subscription to the Denver Post. The argument of canceling your subscription would be that if everybody did that, it would immediately devalue the property so badly that the hedge fund would just, sell it because they can't extract any more capital out of it, and then some white knight would come in and buy it and invest all sorts of millions of dollars into it and hire all these journalists back. Great, yeah, that would be awesome. Is that actually going to happen? I don't know. Another, option is, or do you just keep, do you keep subscribing? And I'll say disclosure: I subscribe to the Denver Post. I get their Sunday print paper, and I have a digital subscription. I subscribe to the local Colorado Springs Gazette because I think you should invest in local news, unless something radical happens. And I don't even know what radical looks like now beyond what's already happened: the protesting, the journalists fighting back from within the newsroom. I feel like it's just kind of a waiting game to see if there's something out there that we're not thinking about. I think of it like this: it's impossible for me to think of a color I've never seen before. And that's kind of the way I feel when I think of what could actually happen and come in and save local journalism in Denver and elsewhere. And I think everybody's just kind of waiting for this magic bullet.